I'm Joyce Hornady. You might say accuracy is my business. I make bullets.
You are listening to the Hornady Podcast.
Thanks for joining us and enjoy the show.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning into the Hornady Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Swerzik, and today another full table. To my left, the Marketing Director, Neil Davies. Across from Neil, Senior Ballistician Jayden Quinlan. Special guest to the show, former Hornady employee, former Senior Ballistic Scientist, outdoor writer, and all-around just ballistic guru, Dave Emary. Guys, thanks for coming on the show.
Hi, guys. It's good to be here.
So, Hornady in the last, probably decade or so, we've really made some huge advancements in bullet technology, cartridge design, and in external ballistics, and just understanding of what's going on during the firing event or internal ballistics. And one of the areas we've really made some advancements on is trajectory solution calculation. That's something that we are passionate about. Jayden, I'm going to steal some words from you here, but we can make the best bullets and ammo in the entire world, and it doesn't make a lick of difference if you can't hit what you're aiming at.
That's right.
And we want you to hit what you're aiming at. From a guy who doesn't always hit what he aims at, it's way more fun when I hit what I'm aiming at, right? So it's something that we're passionate about, and as long-range shooting became more and more popular and prevalent and now very much mainstream, there were some big deficiencies with what was out there, and with the help of Dave, Jayden, our engineering team, and some software development, we came to market with Hornady 4 Degrees of Freedom, and that software became instrumental in hitting what you're aiming at the first time, no matter where you're at in the world. And there has never been a commercially available calculator that had this much power. And there's been some others out there kind of similar, but they lacked, in my opinion, the user interface that was easy to use. They lacked some other bullet brands that everybody wants to use. And so Fordoff became kind of an amazing thing right here in the convenience of your cell phone, free of charge. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty unheard of in today's day and age. But it didn't start that way. It didn't start on your phone, and it surely wasn't easy. So I want to talk through Fordoff. Now, we've got Hornady Podcast number 49 and Hornady Podcast number 51. So for the listeners out there, you're going to want to go check those out. They talk you through what it is and how it works, and they give you some tips and tricks on getting things set up. I want to focus this podcast on why. What was the idea to, one, develop this, sink a whole bunch of funds into it, and then just give it to people for free? And what did that process look like? So before we get there, let's set the stage. It's 2014 time frame. Barrels are getting better quality. The ability to get an accurate range from a laser rangefinder. I remember my first laser rangefinder, little Bushnell jobber, 200 yards. That was it.
Little? Yeah, I have the big one, the first one. Yeah.
And you could get 200 yards out of it. And, we primarily used it for bow hunting and stuff. But that technology changed drastically. And in 2014, 2015, for, under $1,000, you could get a rangefinder that'll get you a range to 1,000 yards. Mm-hmm. And so the ability to get that range plus minus a yard was getting better. You could grab a scope, grab a turret, turn it, and it would move to what you told it. Because I think we all probably cut our teeth with scopes that you even looked at the turret wrong. Zero was shifted, or if you dialed it to the right, you had to go back to the left. And so the quality of this stuff was all getting better. And we found ourselves in a position where the limiting factor wasn't the bullet, wasn't the ammo, wasn't the shooter, wasn't the range, wasn't the scope. It was that the solution that we were getting from these calculators just wasn't cutting the mustard. Mm-hmm. So 2014 time frame, I'm bringing that up because that's when we got our Doppler radar and a lot of advancements really started happening for us. So prior to that, what were you guys using? Neil, Marine Corps Scout, sniper trained. What were you guys using?
A calculator and mil dots back in those days.
You'd go spend hours and hours out on a range, and you'd have your little notepad, and you'd go to this page to find out, well, this is close to the weather conditions I had that day, and
dope, and your bullet was going transonic at where 800 or so, and so
900 maybe.
So you'd have a different BC that you'd have to use for calculating. That was the dark ages. That was a long time ago.
And you had to have that dope,
M40A1.
the data on previous engagement, because if the weather changed, you probably had dope on your gun from every conceivable environment you've ever shot in that you could reference. Mm-hmm. And then, there were some free calculators out there, still out there. One of them, JBM Ballistics. That's probably where I cut my teeth early on.
Yeah, we just got back from the Hornady PRS match in Utah, and it reminds me of a conversation with George Gardner and Jeff Badley. I mean, these guys were shooting what would become PRS. It was like sniper matches and field matches and stuff a long time ago. And they just would literally have sheets of paper that they'd written down dope on, and they know that at 500 it did this. I mean, they were shooting targets at 500 and 550 and 6 and 7 and 8 and whatever, and had dope for the day kind of calculated and on a piece of paper is what they're using. But it was by firing until they figured out where they needed to be at 500. It wasn't some big calculation.
Yeah. Right. So for those big calculations, like I'd mentioned, I was using JBM Ballistics as a kid, and Hornady had a ballistic calculator on our website that used BC. And early on, were you guys using G1 at the time mainly? Was there a big push for the G7 yet?
It was all G1 up till 2000, maybe 12, 14, somewhere in there when, G7 started to get pushed, but it was all G1 based, and every single one of the calculators was the same. I mean, G1 is basically, look, in this distance based on the G1 compared to the standard projectile, it loses this much velocity and this much distance, and every single one of the calculators had the same algorithm, did it the same way. It was all the same.
And not take into account any of the other stuff that we know now, like aerodynamic jump, for example.
No, it as far as those programs were concerned, a projectile could be a concrete block. It didn't care. There wasn't any characteristics of the projectile at all.
Yeah, could have been a chair, bowling ball, concrete block, or a really efficient bullet.
It didn't matter. All it knew was it said, well, based on G1, it loses this much velocity in this distance, and it takes it this much time to fly that distance. And it was hardwired. Yeah. I mean, that was it.
And that creates errors when your bullet is grossly more efficient than what the G1 standard is. So then there was a shift to using more G7-based BCs, and that was an advancement.
Yeah.
Kind of.
I mean, what you saw there was the G1 or the G7 is that drag curve of that specific bullet is under the hood of those BC programs. And so when you feed a BC number into it, let's say a G1 BC of X value, it takes that curve that's in there and it moves it up and down to match the BC number you told it. The problem is that it never is a perfect match to your bullet. So what you saw in the advancement from G1 to G7, a G1 is a very stumpy, ogived, flat-based bullet. A G7 is a more aerodynamic, longer ogive with a boat tail. Not as advanced as some of the bullets we're shooting now, but let's say a long ogive boat tail bullet of the 90s, early 2000s era was fairly well represented by the G7 shape.
Okay.
So when you went from G1 to G7, you're using a drag curve that's more representative to your bullet, and so the trajectory predictions are better. The errors are less observable, but it's still not perfect.
Yeah, it's still not perfect. It still doesn't know anything about your bullet other than the caliber, the weight.
It doesn't know it's a bullet.
Yeah.
It just knows a couple different metrics. I mean, like Dave said, it's predicting things in 3 degrees: elevation, up, down, left, right, and range. It's just a point in space in those 3 orientations. It doesn't know anything else.
It doesn't have any consideration or allowance for dynamics of the bullet and what that can do to the trajectory and the flight of the bullet.
Okay, so there were some huge limitations there. From a industry standpoint, we're getting to the point now where the range, it's not a range estimation error. It's not a problem with the optic. The turrets, you can dial a turret and it's accurate. Bullets are shooting really, really well. We're simply missing targets because of bad data. So what did that early talk look like or sound like for, hey, we're measuring the drag of a bullet. We have drag coefficients. We're using a Doppler radar. Maybe maybe we should look into doing a calculator.
I mean,
Did it start-
there was a lot going on, though.
Yeah.
I mean, I obviously had nothing to do with the scientific part of the whole process, but bullets, we were making now the most advanced bullets that our company had ever made, if not in the industry at that point in time, with the advent of the heat shield tip. So now we've got this bullet that is going to retain its shape as it flies through the air, but there still wasn't a good way to measure it. Now, Dave had used some things, had used programs for scientific testing that were giving you accurate calculations, but it wasn't dumbed down to go on the internet or in a phone app at the time.
Yeah, it was an advanced.
So we could
software
use
package.
that, but you're not going to go to the rifle range with this, laptop computer, and that's not happening, right?
And you had to
So-
know what to feed that thing.
Right,
Like,
it was-
you can't just put a BC number into it and get it. I mean, it requires a lot of data to run that.
I mean, it was a very, very advanced tool. So, but it wasn't the kind of thing that, the average guy's going to pick up. I mean, he's not even going to know what 99% of the inputs are. that are required
And those
for it.
inputs are specific to that individual bullet that you're shooting. So you need
Yep.
to know not just the stuff that you can measure with calipers and a scale. It's
Right.
mass distribution and the density of certain materials and the layout of the bullet and jacket thickness and
Yep.
all of these things, plus many, many more, because again, it's a spinning object, like you mentioned, Dave, the dynamic responses of the bullet. So that program that you had access to, and we were measuring drag, did you guys think early on that, hey, we need to make this a thing for our consumer, or was it, hey, let's use this internally because we want to hit what we're aiming at during our testing? When you're launching bullets out to track them with the radar out to 2,000 yards or something, you want to know where that bullet's going to land.
Well, I think it was, Neil hit on it, that there was a whole lot of stuff going on, right? I mean, in about a
Yes.
2-year span, I mean, almost the entire complexion of the industry changed. And it transitioned from the traditional 200 to 400 yard hunter to, hey, the military and competition and guys. I mean, these guys are wanting to shoot at extreme, I mean, like a mile, 2 miles. And we were starting to make bullets capable of doing that. And at the same time, we were doing the radar testing, and it's like, hey, we're getting real honest to goodness aerodynamic data off of these bullets. And there was no real,
There's nothing for the layman to use
Right.
to realize the benefit of the product. That was the thing.
There was not easy to use, accurate under all conditions solver that existed at that point in time.
And part of the things that we were dealing with back then was there was a lot of people that had started doing quote unquote long range hunting. So they're shooting animals at longer distances than they'd ever done, non-traditional. And again, for the record, our position is if you can get closer, you should. So let's keep that in mind. But there are people that were shooting animals now at greater distances than what they'd typically been doing in the past. Well, again, that was the driver for what we started off doing. And when I say we, I mean you guys.
Yeah.
With what became the ELD X hunting bullets. We wanted to provide these people with a bullet that was reliable because prior to that, most everybody was using a Botel Hollow Point match bullet that is not predictable in terminal performance, how it's going to react.
Sure.
It'll do several different things depending on who knows, whatever.
Bunch of variables.
Yeah. So, okay, good. So now we have a bullet that will be reliable and perform consistently all the time under, if you do this, it does this. But there was no good accurate calculator for you to make those impacts. I mean, it's great. The bullet's going to do its part, but if you hit high or low or whatever, you're not going to have lethal effects on an animal.
Yep.
Obviously, there's a target match shooting application there too. But that was all kind of the driver as we were going, and we were in a period of time there for our company where we were hardcore into just, ballistic aerodynamic advancements, technological advancements for the shooter with what then became our solver. So that's kind of what shaped the impetus for some of this stuff to happen.
Yeah, the end user was beginning to do things that was way outside the capability of anything that had traditionally been used. There was now, as you said, equipment that was capable of doing this, but there wasn't any reliable, foolproof truly accurate solver to give these guys the answers they needed. And we had been using this software for years and years and years to design bullets. And with the radar, we now are able to get the data to drive this software to give us the answers that we needed. And it turned into, hey, this is really something we need to figure out how to package to give to the community to be able to have this tool.
Yeah, because we were using it ourselves. I mean,
Right.
so we all lived in the BC world prior to what you just said, Dave. So we suffered from the same problems that everybody did with using that system. But at the same time, we would go run this super advanced software we have, and it would tell us the correct numbers. But we don't have it anywhere. So we were running printed out drop charts from that system instead of using a BC calculator that's going to be available to you in the field on a phone app or on a Kestrel or whatever it may be. So we essentially, and then we would go shoot that piece of paper, and it would be more accurate to what was going on than this live fed calculator that we're running in the field.
Absolutely.
And so the natural, progression from that was, well, can we take this and make it accessible to everybody?
Yeah.
And this first iteration was online. So we'd had
Right.
a traditional BC calculator for a long time, and then programs were written, and it was the FordOff capability was integrated onto our website.
And I remember, I think it was August of 2015, the Vortex Extreme was a match that was held every year, and they've quit doing it now, but that was still up in Tremont, Utah.
Mm-hmm.
And Jayden, I don't know if you remember, but you and I flew out to Utah to shoot this match, August of 2015. And what I love about being in the West, there was a 1,000-yard range, public range, 200 yards off the interstate.
Yeah, that was great.
I forget the town in Utah. But anyways, I remember we went there the day before the match, and we had to go to, it was a special website that wasn't publicly available.
That's right.
Yeah, we had to go to
We were still beta testing.
Hornady.com/FordOff-beta or something like that. And we were able to go the day before the match, get the atmospherics. And, at the time I was still using, I think I was using Strelock at that time for BC on my phone, because there was one of the only ones with an app, right? And we went out there to Utah into the secret web page, and it was like, oh man, yeah, this FordOff is amazing. And the website layout was pretty rudimentary, but we just selected the bullet. We were shooting 140 ELD matches and put in the good atmospheric data, twist rate, and all that. And wow, this is going to work. And we went to the hotel, got on Wi-Fi, and made a little dope card for the next day. And I think we, top 10 or something like that. It's not like we won the match or whatever, but it wasn't because of bad dope. It was that stuff was spot on, and it was kind of like, oh my gosh, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand the complexity at the time, because for me it seemed really easy. There's a drop-down menu. I just pick the bullet I'm shooting, and that's it. That seems easy enough.
You didn't see the pages and pages and pages of stuff that was behind that one little input page.
Yeah, well, we've talked about it in many different forums, but I think it's worth bringing up here. I hear this a lot when people talk to me about FordOff versus other BC calculators that are out there now. And it's like, oh, it's just two ways to get the same answers, and I prefer to use this.
No.
And it's like, you guys don't understand.
No.
It's not, you're not going to get the same answer. You might be able to manipulate a BC calculator to give you the same or the correct answer in this particular instance. And when the temperature changes, your elevation changes, and it's going to be wrong again, and you'll have to fudge it around to make it work. It's not the same.
If your wind changes, depending upon the range, the angle, uphill, downhill, all of that kind of stuff. And the further out you go, the bigger and bigger and bigger that problem becomes.
Yeah, because you're dealing with you're dealing with this sliding. You're trying to match your bullets performance up to a known projectile, and they're not the same.
They're not the same.
It's a sliding system.
Yeah.
But I've been through Jayden's FordOff class a number of times, and I don't know how long you spend, Jayden, going through why these are all the inputs that we use for FordOff, and then what's a BC calculator, like 4?
Yeah, 3 to 4.
3 to 4.
Yeah, so walk us through how many points that is.
It's like a couple hours of all this information, and I try to tell people, I'm like, okay, all that is just so that you know that FordOff is better.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's orders of magnitude higher in complexity in what it's doing. But a BC calculator is going to take 3 to 4 inputs. The main 3 would be bullet weight, bullet diameter, ballistic coefficient value. Some calculators will take a 4th, which is bullet length, where they're attempting to do aerodynamic jump and spindrift.
Which is,
which it's not technically. But Fordoff is taking 437 unique values to every single bullet and applying those. And those are aerodynamic values across the drag data, across the aerodynamic moment and coefficient data that, essentially will predict a bullet's dynamic behavior in flight, in addition to its inertias and where the mass and the exact center of gravity location. All of those things that are important to be able to execute the equations of motion that predict a projectile's behavior in flight. That's what is in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, to put into context what the engine in Fordoff is really doing, the inputs, the data, and the output that it gives are really equivalent to what's used to predict the flight of a long-range missile, long-range artillery, whatever. It's the same.
That level of complexity is
Right.
not even close to the 4 inputs
Oh,
of a
no.
BC
No,
calculator.
no way.
We were shooting bullets at 2 miles in Utah with Robert Brantley and Tom Manners out of his giant King of the 2 Mile gun. So yeah, those are definitely you're getting with it. So I
And
mean,
I-
if you could predict that kind of performance, I mean that's real.
One of the important things that Jayden mentioned that I helps people separate the idea of a ballistic coefficient solution versus using something like Fordoff is the equations of motion. Right? There are physics equations of motion, and to solve them, you need vast amounts of data specific to the individual projectile that you're shooting.
Yes.
And things like spindrift and aerodynamic jump, to calculate those, you need to know the bullet you're shooting. So if you're using a BC-based calculator that says it's giving you spindrift or aerodynamic jump, it doesn't know enough about the bullet to calculate those.
It technically cannot do that.
Yeah.
It's using a formula that's based on empirical data. So what those guys do is they go out and they shoot a bunch and they try to pull out the raw spindrift, or they try to pull out the raw aerodynamic jump from what they observe,
Mm-hmm.
and then they generate a formula that mimics that, and that's what they put in there because it's the only way to handle it. You can't do it any other way.
It's exactly the same as BC. You're trying to come up with a number that, yeah, boy, you know what? This is a pretty good approximation of what happens, and that's all it is. It's an approximation.
Yeah, I mean it's math. It's just
Yeah,
it's just better math with more inputs. I mean, you know.
it's not solving the physics. It's a curve fit to questionable data.
And that's ballistic coefficient-based solutions.
Yeah.
And
I mean, you hit on it there, the equations of motion. That's why they came up with BC, because back in the day when they came up with BCs in the late 1880s or something, they didn't have computers. And to try to do all this on a pad of paper with pencil with somebody that could do the math was like,
That's half your career.
it took days,
Yeah.
weeks, months to do this kind of thing. And so they had to come up with, hey, look, we got to dumb this down and simplify this to get a reasonably usable number over the range that we'll expect people to shoot something.
Yep.
And that's why they came up with it.
And I think one of the reasons we're seeing, we saw back then and we're seeing now, that continued divergence, it's not the range, it's the time. If you're shooting 200 yards, the bullet's there right now. And people are shooting time of flights now that are seconds. When you mentioned the King of
10
2
seconds.
Mile.
When we were shooting those, what were we shooting? 375s. And yes, 10-second time of flight.
I believe it.
That bullet's in the air for so
So you
long.
could shoot, literally, I mean, you could if you wanted to. We didn't, but you could shoot and then go
Roll the
back
bolt.
go back to your glass and see where you're
Yeah.
going to impact on a
Shoot,
spotting
get
scope or
up, have
something.
a drink, walk back to the spotting scope.
But yeah, I would be spotting. So like John Kyle Truitt from Foundation, he had his son there and his little boy shot. So yeah, anyway, I wasn't on the glass. Fires the shot, and then you like kind of casually walk over and look through there and see where you splash. Yeah, you got plenty of time.
Yeah, that's remarkable. So from a technological standpoint, we've got so much complexity. It's not easy, but to make a website page, that's probably the first, that's the easiest thing to do. And that's available, and it's still out there. Hornady.com, click on our calculator. You can toggle it between a BC calculator or Fordoff. Not the world's most convenient, though, when you're out on a backcountry hunt or you're at a PRS match. So the natural progression is, hey, we should get this, in your hand.
Mm-hmm.
And
again, I mean, not just match shooters, but hunters too.
yeah,
We try to provide you with a bullet that's going to work under conditions that typically people weren't using. Well, now let's give you the capability to predict your impacts so that you can cleanly dispatch animals.
Mhm.
At the ranges that you feel comfortable with, obviously.
right.
But yeah, that was a big part of why it came to be.
So it's available right now in an app, free of charge. You can get it on your phone, and it's also available in a Kestrel. And the Kestrel was kind of just and this is what everybody's using anyway. It should be in here because they're rugged, they're waterproof.
Simple.
People have driven over them with their car. I mean, like, they're pretty indestructible. And then you have the cell phone app, which is incredibly user friendly. I mean, just if you've been around a cell phone most of your life, which a lot of us have, gosh, it's simple to use. It's easy to use. Which one of those came first, and how did that project take place?
I think we started working on the phone app in 2016.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And the Kestrel would have been probably 2017.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that an app, for anybody that's never done it, it's not like you just magic that thing into existence. That takes.
That's a lot of work. And I don't know if you've ever looked at Dave and I, but we're not like cell phone technology guys. So
No.
it was too,
I got to dig on you, Dave. So fun fact about Dave. So Dave would leave. Dave was very efficient. Now that you're gone, I can give you a hard time. But anyway, Dave was super efficient. He'd get everything done, and he'd walk out the door at 5:00, and about 10 minutes later, you wouldn't answer his phone, so it was off. So yeah, that's Dave's cell phone savvy right there.
Yeah,
I don't want this thing. It's off.
I got my first smartphone in 2014 or 15.
Yep.
I had a flip phone up until that point.
Yeah.
So
And also, during this time when we started working on the cell phone app, I don't think Jayden still owned a TV.
Yeah,
that's correct. Yeah.
I don't.
yeah.
I don't think I got a cell phone until your wife had a spare one. Somebody turned back
They
in
made you
her
have one?
desk, and she said, "Hey, would you like a cell phone?" Well, yeah, okay.
Yeah, tethered to it for
Yeah,
life.
right.
So that said, we're not going to build a phone app. I mean, if I had a smartphone for 1 year prior to embarking on creating a phone app, that's not going to happen. So we partnered up with an app developer that was pretty experienced and had a good reputation.
Excellent.
And we've been working with them ever since. I mean,
Yeah.
when I think back to the first generation of the app, it almost makes me cringe on the user. We just didn't know what we didn't know. We
100%.
took a stab at, it should be something kind of like this. And some of those features are still in the app today. Some of them held. But it's changed a lot. We've continued to try to improve it and add features, and it's nowhere near what it looked like in 2016.
It's a living project. It's never done.
Yep.
And then there's other issues that you run into when there's a software update on the phones. Well, then it could present a bug to the app, and then you've got to counter that. And they're pretty good about being proactive about it, but that's just the unfortunate reality of stuff that's attached to a phone.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that also people don't quite understand. When your phone, you go to bed at night, it automatically updates. That can wreak havoc on not FortOff specifically, all apps. Yeah. And then so there's people behind the scenes going, oh, there's a bug with the new Android update, and we have to do this. And there's all kinds of workarounds.
And that should be a word of caution. So to anybody out there that's watching or listening, if you've got an important hunt that's going on, or you've got a match that's coming up, make sure you check to make sure that your app is working correctly. If you need to sync it, you need to go sync it. But maybe you don't need to update your phone the night before you're going on your once-in-a-lifetime elk hunt,
Yep.
So just keep that in mind because you need that app to work correctly.
Yeah.
And those are out of once Apple or Android does an update, it doesn't mean that there's going to be a bug, but the potential could be there,
That's true.
So be aware of that.
An important thing, though, around that time when we decided to do the cell phone app, that was the next natural progression, was, it was going to cost us quite a bit of money to go down that road, and we decided to do it and commit to it. So the next kind of decision to be made was, do you charge for it or do you offer it for free? And we had a lot of conversations about that. And it mainly came down to the point where, there's folks that are brand loyal out there, right? There's guys that are They love Burger bullets, and that's all they shoot. They love Sierra, that's all they shoot. Whatever it may be, and that's great. Other people make good bullets too, you know. So our standpoint was, do we just do Hornady bullets? Do we put anybody else's bullets in? And the decision there was, yes, let's put as many other
put everybody's in.
You know, bullets that are worthy of being in there. So long range capable bullets. You're not going to see a varmint bullet in there or a traditional, you know, lead tipped hunting bullet or something like that.
Sure.
So that was step one, add competitor bullets. And then do you charge for it or not? And the thought was, you shouldn't have to, you already paid for the product. You shouldn't have to then pay an entry fee to be able to use the product to its designed intention.
Mm-hmm.
And you've seen that from a lot of other places. You know, most other places will charge you for a ballistic solution, and we don't feel that's right. You've already put your money into the product. You've voted with your dollars. You should be able to use that to its highest possible degree without having to pay more money. So we offered it for free.
And for some of the other folks that are providing those ballistic apps, that's their business.
Sure.
I mean, that's yeah, okay, it's part of what we do, but
Our
we're
business
selling
is
bullets, and we
ammo.
want you to realize the capability of our product.
Yep.
Yeah, and you just hit on it there. I think that there was also a line of thinking too that, you know, this is a paradigm shift in the industry and the users. And
Yeah,
if
because
you're-
we're not using BCs.
Right. And if you're going to charge people to use this, they're going to be like, oh, what I got now is just fine. We wanted people to come in and use this, and it's like, if you're going to charge an entrance fee, you're going to really limit that.
Yep.
So it's like, we want people to use this.
That's
I mean,
true.
we've added other features, and we'll continue to add cool new features that are, you know, paid within the app for certain things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that makes sense. But, you know, the app is whatever we make off of that is. I don't think it's covering
Not
much.
much.
It might keep
No.
one light bulb on someplace.
Yeah.
But
Maybe.
yeah.
Yeah, and there are some nice features like you mentioned, the multi-HUD, the range card feature, and now the group analysis feature.
Yeah.
That group analysis feature is absolutely phenomenal, and it kind of leads me to one point that I want to bring up. It's more technical than historical, but one of the big separators for me in hitting what you're aiming at the first time when you show up. You know, we don't all shoot in the same place. Sometimes I'm in Missouri or Kansas or California or wherever, and you can show up and have good data. And one of the reasons for that is we have a feature known as zero angle.
Yeah, I'd like to hear you guys
Yes.
try to do your best to simplify that for everybody out there, because it's the one thing that kind of throws everybody for a curve from time to time
Yeah.
because they just don't understand it. Instead, I mean, I try to encourage people just trust it, but I mean, you toggle back and forth from zero range, which means that's your typical, okay, I shoot at 100 yards and I'm dead zero typically. Okay, cool. And then you've got zero angle. So you could toggle to that, which is a more advanced feature and it's a one-time zero for that firearm system. I mean,
Yeah.
if you don't change any of the componentry or anything, or projectile or powder or anything else, you've got a zero now that will account for environmental conditions wherever. You want to get zeroed at Camp Lejeune at Stone Bay, and then you want to go sheep hunting in Uzbekistan, or let's say some, in Alaska, where you got 2,000 foot, 3,000, 4,000 foot. You don't have to confirm it. So I'd like to just see if you guys can try to simplify that for the user.
You want me to take a shot first?
Well, I was going to say, like, kind of the groundwork going into it is we had all lived with zero range. I mean, that was the way things were done. And I remember we were sitting down looking at stuff and essentially parsing out how zero range does not work. It's a function of those unique conditions when you did it. So essentially we see the zero range change, right? We would go zero a gun on one test day, and then that rifle would sit in the ballistics lab untouched, and we go back out the next week with the same exact ammo, same exact rifle. Nothing has changed, but the zero changes when we go shoot the second day.
Yeah.
And so we knew by nature of that observation that this isn't right, because this isn't how it works. It's not repeatable. Something is wrong. And so
Because of
that
environmental changes.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
wind, direction,
yeah,
speed.
it's a 100-yard zero in Death Valley on a 125-degree day is not going to be a 100-yard zero in Telluride, Colorado on a 20-degree day.
Yeah.
It's just the air density is going to change your zero. And Jayden and I talked a lot about this, and I I had some previous experience, firing artillery, where it's not a zero range. It's a what's your atmospheric conditions and what they call it QE, or what angle do I have to put on this gun to get it to go
where
I want it to go. And that's when we started saying, we need to treat this like artillery, where it's not any zero. It's, okay, I know the mechanical relationship between where my scope is and where the bore of the gun is. That is a fixed mechanical thing. It never changes. So if you can establish that, then it simply comes down to, if I know my atmospheric effects, I put this angle on the gun, which is come up on the scope, and you're going to hit the target. And now you've separated this whole thing from, well, I got to re-zero every time I go somewhere, and I have to re-zero every day. And if I go from here to there, I got to go to get to a range and
because you have a baseline zero angle,
right?
That in these conditions, this is what I was.
Really, what it was, and I remember you and I talking about that, and even actually saying it. What we're doing now is taking a small arms rifle and treating it now like it's an artillery piece, like the military does. Yeah. It's not about any kind of zero. It's about what is the angle I have to put on this gun, which is controlled by the scope come up in order to get it to hit where I want it to hit.
And that's how it actually works.
Yeah,
you hit a point down range not because you told the program some arbitrary distance in relationship to it. I'm zeroed at 100. 100 is the distance, zeroed is the arbitrary relationship. What you're telling it is, I'm launching this bullet at this angle through this environment, and it says, okay, it's going to go here because of that.
Yeah.
And then from then on out, the calculator will use environmental inputs that you place in the engine, and will tell you what you need to do. It'll give you your come-ups, obviously, to get that barrel angle correct for an impact.
Yep. And I think one of the key things that will separate, because there's other BC programs out there that offer a quote-unquote atmospheric zero, which sounds like it's the same thing, and it's similar, but since those are BC calculators, they can't calculate aerodynamic jump. And the crosswinds present during your initial zeroing, and when you set up your zero angle, it's critical that those are documented correctly, because it seems like it's 100 yards and the bullet's going 3,000 feet per second. There's no way that can have an effect on it, but it certainly does, depending on the angle and the speed of the wind.
Right.
And like I said, that really separates things. You can zero a rifle, and this is tangential, but we're doing now, a lot of us are doing 10 or 20 shot groups to establish the zero of the rifle and set up the zero angle feature with a 20 shot group. And now, once that's done, and it's done correctly, it doesn't matter where you go. It's going to be calculated.
And that's the same thing. You're instilling error into the system. Can you go out there with a 20 shot group and look at that and go, I'm about 3/4 of an inch high, and you get a calipers out and you measure that and no, that's more like 0.63 inches high.
Right.
Well, boy, that's a big difference at 1,500 yards.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. It can be, for sure.
And I mean, for a lot of folks that are, casual hunters or shooters, if you learn how to use the app, you're going to get a better solution. I think part of our responsibility is to try to explain how some of these things work. Aerodynamic jump might be a little these things might be complex or abstract things for some folks. But ultimately, if you just trust that the app is doing this stuff for you and calculating these things and trusting that if you put the right information in there, you're going to get the best output. So it's a difference between hitting a deer in the heart at 300 yards or maybe hitting just a little high and clipping the lungs instead of the heart. I mean, that's relevant for everybody out there. So it's an app that obviously is great for everybody shooting matches, but I wouldn't discount it for somebody who's shooting,
hunting as well.
Yeah, hunting and shooting deer at relatively, conventional ranges anyways.
Well, you do have to trust it, and when that zero angle feature first became available in the app, I wasn't 100% dyed-in-the-wool blindly trusting it either. And there was a match out in Broadwater, Nebraska.
Yeah,
about,
okay.
5 hours and some change away from here. And the day before the match, I had Jayden's AI 300 PRC with the Hummer barrel on it. And I forget what the hand load was, but reloader 26 and a 225 grain ELD match. Didn't do any load development, just plugged it together, went to the range, shot a 10-shot group, and set up the zero angle on the Ford Off app and the zero range. zero
You
range.
did them both.
I did them both. I cloned the profile and had one labeled range, one labeled angle. And there was a PRS match, and they had a side
PRS
stage.
match. Was it 300 PRC?
No, they had a side stage,
Oh, okay.
1 mile shoot
Oh, yeah.
with the 300 PRC. That's why I was going to take the 300, just, $5
Why not?
to, whatever. So I set them up both, zero range, zero angle. That was on a Thursday. On a Friday, we drive from 1,800 feet here in Grand Island, Nebraska to 4,500 feet out by Bridgeport, Nebraska. Totally different environment, whatever. Get the 300 PRC out of the case, watch the wind for a few minutes. So I opened up the zero range and the zero angle, and I decided, okay, I got to use the zero angle. It's a new feature. I trust Jayden. He tells me it's the way and the light. So I open up the zero angle. I get the dope after watching the wind for a while, put it on the gun, first round impact at a mile. And it was like, okay, I think.
Did you go back and look at your zero range file to see what it would have told you to do?
Yes.
Would it have been wrong?
It would have been not only wrong, but off of the 36-inch square.
Yeah.
It was,
So even though, we've done all of those advanced things in Fort Off to make it the most advanced calculation possible, you're still hamstrung by things that are wrong, like zero range. I mean, you can use zero range, but it's not how it works. You're still inducing error into the system by using zero range versus zero angle.
Yep. And I've been a believer ever since. You set one of those up and you do it right, it simply works.
Yeah.
And that to me was the aha moment, like, okay, that is how it works. And
it's just a paradigm shift for folks. I mean, we're
it is.
all so used to the convenience of zero range, which is I just put in a number and my involvement in that is done. And with the zero angle process, like you were saying, Dave, in artillery, we launch at a certain barrel angle. Well, how do we find what that angle is on our gun? We can't throw any sort of angular measurement device on the barrel and figure that out. It's too precise of an angle.
It's just back calculating it.
So you find it by experimentally shooting. You shoot a group just like you would for your zero, but then you tell the program everything that happened. The environmental conditions, the wind conditions, and then specifically where you're hit, to your point, Dave, of like measuring each bullet hole and getting the true average, your mean point of impact of where you hit. And you tell all the program that, and it says, okay, the only way that you could hit there at that distance in this environment is if the angle of the barrel was X. That becomes your zero angle. And so it's a little bit more involved than just typing in a number on zero range, but that work you put into doing that is well worth it. You'll reap the rewards.
How many of our listeners are going to be guilty of what I'm about to say? I'm guilty of it too. You set up a zero range off of 3 shots, off of 5 shots.
Good luck. It could be perfect, but statistics say it's not going to be.
Yep, I know a lot
and the
of
data says
I know a
that
lot
as
of
well.
really good shooters who do that, and then throughout the day at a match, they're bumping numbers, changing zero, changing BC, doing whatever they're doing to fudge stuff around on those BC-based calculators that are out there, and doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, and you can do that, and you can get away with it and be successful doing that if you have enough experience doing it.
Mm-hmm.
But what does it cost you to get to the level of experience where you know what to tweak and how to tweak it?
A lot of time on the range.
That should be an indication to you that something is wrong because you feed it the information velocity, environmental conditions, BC, twist rate, all those things. You feed it that stuff and it spits out the wrong answer. There's something wrong there. You shouldn't have to continually lie to the program and manipulate things to get it to predict what you're observing.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And so on top of everything we talked about, aerodynamic jump being one of those that you don't have to lie to the program to get accurate numbers.
Should probably take a split second to cover the aerodynamic jump for some folks.
Sure.
Well, aerodynamic jump is a physics thing, and I'm old enough to have played with a gyroscope when I was a kid. You had the gyroscope and you wrap the string around it and you zip, the thing sitting here. Well, a bullet's a gyroscope. And don't ask me to put the math to it, but the physics of a gyroscope is you put a force input into it and it reacts 90 degrees from that. So there's a thing called the right hand rule. You put your hand like this, your index finger points downrange, your thumb is up, and your middle finger is a force input. Well, if the bullet's flying downrange and it feels a wind pushing on it from the right, its response is going to be up.
If it's a twist rate matters too.
If it's a right hand twist rate,
That's the right hand rule.
and it's the same thing. If you're going downrange and the wind's from the left, it's going to go down. And this is very, very useful for guys that are sheep hunting that are shooting off a cliff. You know, you shoot off a cliff and 10 yards away, you all of a sudden hit this 20-mile-an-hour updraft. Your bullet's going to go to the right.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to jump to the right. It's all called muzzle jump, but it's going to vary in its direction. And it's just a basic physics principle. You can't get around this. But to predict it accurately, you have to know the equations of motion of the bullet. Other than that, you're right back to BC again, and this is a estimate.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's a big feature that's added into the Ford-off side of it.
Yep. That's one of those features that's misunderstood, I think, by a lot of folks, but present and needs to be accounted for if you're going to hit what you're aiming at from, and we talk about it on the recreational side. All of us here are competitive shooters, but even on
Competitive is a leap.
Well, yeah. We go to the competitions.
Shoot in a competition.
Yeah, we shoot in competitions.
Being competitive is a whole other thing.
Right.
Yeah.
But you look at like the military sniper application where, they're high value stuff and you got one shot, you want to make sure that you put it where it belongs. And something like a BC based calculator is simply not the right way. Right. And it's great to see technology evolve now that is easy to use, that is available on a mass scale, and that also is pretty darn all-inclusive. I mean, we've got obviously all of the Hornady bullets that are applicable, but we've got Berger, Sierra, Lapua, Warner Tool, Vapor Trail, Nosler. Any applicable bullet is we've got it available, and that library is changing. Gosh, it used to change quarterly, let's say, but now with Jacob working in the lab, we're adding bullets at an incredible rate to just continue to expand that library and expand the usefulness to our consumer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's finishing up, I think, a set of 10 non-Hornady bullets to add in. A lot of them are folks that listen to the podcast and send us bullet samples to add in. A lot of those are going in right now.
Yeah.
So, we'll continue to do that.
That's a great point. We always encourage interaction. So, for the listeners, if you drop a comment on YouTube, or if you want to interact with us directly, email us at podcast@hornady.com. We've got a bunch of suggestions for bullets, and sometimes people want bullets that simply won't work in Ford-off. Let's say they're a polymer tipped bullet and the tip deforms in flight. Well, that we can't predict that.
Yeah,
so we
need
can't
to
put
know.
that in Ford-off. But a lot of those that have reached out that want a certain bullet, it's like, we've been trying to buy it, but we can't find it on the shelf, have sent in 50 bullets, and we really appreciate that, and it benefits the community as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something that we do appreciate, and we don't take lightly. That
Well, I think not to just slobberingly try to promote Hornady, but I think there was a very big sentiment in there when we did this that this isn't about us Hornady, and we want to advance the community, we want to advance the industry, and we want to benefit the end user. And that we realize that there's people that don't shoot Hornady bullets, but this technology can benefit the entire community.
Yeah, it can, and it has greatly. And so for the listener, Hornady.com, it's right there on the web based. If you want to use that, go to the App Store or Google Play, Hornady Ballistics. That's got the Ford-off calculator there, and it's also in the Kestrel with Ford-off as well. So several different options for you to get it, use it, and harness the power of the 21st century. Because the BCs go back a long way.
Yeah,
and it really has, like you'd mentioned earlier in the podcast, Dave. It's a paradigm shift, and it's not always easy for somebody to go, well, I want a match using this BC calculator. And you start asking them, well, do you have to change stuff that is true, like your muzzle velocity, or stuff like that? And they start to connect the dots and really see that.
That was always the one thing that just completely blew my mind. Was it's like you as a shooter, the only number that you really know for sure is your muzzle velocity. That's the only number you know. Why are you changing it? If you have to change it, something else is wrong.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you shouldn't have to change anything. Yeah. I mean, we're constantly looking at little things to do to improve the app, anyways. Inclusion in the Kestrel has been a big one too.
Sure.
Gives somebody another option. You can back up what you've got going on by having maybe some duplicity with the phone app and then with the actual Kestrel unit itself.
Yeah.
And this just came to my mind. You were talking about muzzle jump. The other thing that this has, Spindrift.
Oh, sure.
And this
Often
is something that a
overlooked.
lot of guys just really don't even think about, but that became very, very real to me on a very early use of the LDM bullets when we went on an antelope hunt. And I was calling the wind for somebody at a very long shot that I wasn't really comfortable with, but we had a good range. I made a good wind call, but I forgot Spindrift. And we got lucky. We hit him in the neck instead of the chest. And, immediately after the impact, it was like, oh, crap, I forgot Spindrift. Well, this shot was considerable distance. And you go back and you backed out the numbers, and it's like, yeah, this was like a foot.
Yep.
And that's what it was. And that made it very, very real to me at that point that, if you start talking these extreme distances, if you have, if you're not going to include Spindrift, you're going to miss.
Yeah.
And Spindrift is exactly the same as muzzle jump. It's as that bullet goes over the top of the trajectory and starts coming down, you start get a small component of the wind that's hitting that bullet in the bottom. And it's the same thing with that, the wind's now hitting it in the bottom. It's going to push the bullet that way. So
that's interesting.
And again, these BC programs that have Spindrift, it's again an estimate.
An empirical formula
they
that
can't
they came
predict
up with.
it. Yeah. And how good was their data that they came up with this formula for? Who knows?
For some bullets, probably pretty good.
Yeah.
And for others, probably not so much.
Yeah.
And it all comes back to, like Jayden mentioned right away, equations of motion. And if you're dreaming up empirical formulas to solve equations of motion, you're not solving the equations.
Yeah.
You're putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone, figuratively speaking.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, and I mean, so for people who do download the app, there's a pile of videos out there showing you how to work the app and how to get your inputs and how to use zero angle.
Yep.
Which is always another one. And ultimately, it just ask people to trust it.
Yeah. And
like,
it's free. Download it and run it
trust
side by
I mean,
side.
the big one is, just the environmental. You're going to have better. Your impacts are going to be where they're supposed to be if you have the correct inputs on the day of your shot. As long as when you did your zero, you can travel from you name it, South Carolina to go hunt elk in the Rockies and maybe confirm zero or confirm trajectory. Let's say that's about it. Maybe check it on a rock at a couple 100 yards, and if you hit there, you're good to go.
Yep, I think that's a big selling point for Ford Off. You can take it anywhere, and it simply works.
Like Africa, maybe.
Yeah, like Africa. You can do that.
The other big thing that became very real to me too, now having lived in the Southwest and done a lot of shooting in mountains, is, and you and I tried to do a lot of work with, is high angle of fire. You get beyond 300 yards and the rifle rule doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, the cosine angle.
And if you can't solve the equations of motion for angle of fire with some of the ranges guys are trying to shoot, you're going to miss by a long ways.
Mm-hmm.
But Ford Off, solves the equations of motions for angle of fire. And I've a lot of this stuff too, I had problems with. It's like, is this really real, And where I'm living now, I had opportunities to shoot out to like 1,600 yards at 30-degree angles of fire. And I'm going to tell you, it works. I mean, I've had first shot hits on man-sized targets at 1,600 yards with a 6.5 Creedmoor.
That doesn't happen on accident.
Yeah.
So another thing related to those equations of motion and how important it is to have your individual bullet to solve the trajectory solution. Coriolis and earth-based effects, kind of a almost romantic kind of thing. You're talking about, I'm calculating my trajectory with the spin of the earth and stuff. It's kind of got the cool Bob Lee swagger kind of thing going on, but it is a real thing. I think it's generally overstated, but how does Ford Off handle earth-based effects?
Sure. So there's really two different components to it, and based on your direction of fire. So an easterly or westerly direction of fire, you have an alignment with or in opposition to the rotational vector of the Earth. And that plays into a thing called the Eötvös effect. Essentially, you're going to start hitting high or low from that. When you start shooting north or south components, what you have occurring is, since the Earth is a ellipsoid, unless there's flat earthers out there, but make them mad. The Earth is an ellipsoid. So what that means is, if you're shooting north or south at all, you're at a different circumference. The shooter's location is at a different circumference of the Earth than the target is, because it's north or south of you. And so the rotational velocity is different between where you are and where the target is. And so you'll see a little bit of left to right deviation from those two. The north and south components are generally pretty small. You have to have extremely long time of flights to really start to see that exposure show up on target. But the east to west stuff is absolutely real and observable by most of the shooting we do. When we started, so we validated Fort Off before we ever launched it to the public, right?
Absolutely.
We went out and shot it.
The two of us didn't believe some of this, because we had some conversations. Do you really believe some of this? It's like, man,
It seems like an awful lot.
Yeah, I don't know about this.
So we did validation on Earth-based effects, and we went out and we shot groups. I don't remember the range. I want to say
1,500 yards.
Yep, and we had a location where essentially we could, face east and shoot a 1,500-yard target, and then spin around immediately and face west and shoot a 1,500. And wind conditions were low, really wasn't much of a contribution. Velocity was tracked the whole time and accounted for. And yeah, it's real, and it predicts it correctly.
Yeah.
And we did the same thing with the angle fire, like you said, Dave. You've experienced it down in New Mexico where you're at now. I took a trip early on before we launched it down to southern Colorado, where I grew up, and did a bunch of high angle validation across various calibers. And we've continued to validate it. I just shot the Cody NRL Hunter match where there was one stage out of 18 where you had less than 15-degree angle of fire.
Wow.
And everything was perfect. I mean, so the level of complexity is not only in the bullet and how it's handled with the equations of motion, but also everything else included, the earth-based effects, the angle fire, all of that stuff.
Fantastic. Yeah, earth-based effects not to be overlooked, especially on those really long shots.
Mm-hmm.
And it's convenient on the cell phone app. There's a toggle right there, no problem.
Yep.
And then on the Kestrel, I think Kestrels are always on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can't turn those off, you can't toggle those off.
Yep.
But again, for those 1,000+ yard shots.
We understand some of the skepticism of people with some of this stuff, because it is all very new. I mean, there was some of this stuff we were skeptical about and had to go prove it to ourselves. But I just want to tell any viewers or listeners that, we too were skeptical about some of this, and we went out and proved it to ourselves and said, yeah, this does work. And I remember when we did that east to west thing, it was, I think we were firing a 7 mag and 162 ELDMs, and it was like 7 or 8 inches difference with exactly the same hold, exactly the same scope setting between firing east to west and west to east.
You two cats have had a lot of aha moments in your
Oh, yeah.
time together.
We've done a thing or two.
Yeah, that's cool.
Well, to quote Bill Nye the Science Guy, it's not magic, it's science.
It's science.
Yeah.
Yep. And when you're using BC calculators to do a lot of this stuff, it's not magic, it's witchcraft.
It's dirty witchcraft.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's dramatic math simplifications that work for a certain approximation, but you rapidly get outside of what it's capable of handling.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I appreciate you guys discussing this stuff, especially on the historical side of, apps aren't easy to develop. That took a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of resources, both financially and in just the time consumption. And, getting it in the Kestrel and that's kind of been the industry standard for match shooters and snipers alike, that you have a Kestrel because of how rugged they are, and having it available out there on the interwebs there at Hornady.com. We've got an option for everybody. And because it's free of charge, the bars of entry are pretty low. If you've always used BC your whole life and some of the stuff is ringing in your ears like, I have to run a muzzle velocity that I know is incorrect, and I have to change my BC 3 or 4 times a day during a match, and I have to change my zero range and all that kind of stuff. That's sounding familiar. Just download the app and run them side by side, and use some like Bill Nye the Science Guy would say, use the scientific method to test it out. See see what works for you, and I'm confident you'll see that when you do this, it just works. One of the things that's not always, but one of the things that has annoyed me as of recent, maybe annoyed's not the word, but forever using BCs, going back to my first time I opened jbmballistics.com. Junk in, junk out. Good data in, good data out. Okay, yep, got to do that. With ForDoff, that's true. With a BC calculator, you can put in every possible thing to the most nth degree that you can measure it, and it's still wrong.
Yep.
And
Right.
to me, that good data in, good data out. It's like, no, I don't know, because it's smoke and mirrors.
Yeah.
And there's a better way now. And like I said, free of charge. We've got some in-app purchases there. One of which is that group analysis feature. And we spent a lot of time talking about zero angle and how beneficial that is. And with the group analysis feature, it's never been easier to obtain your zero angle. You can snap a picture of the group, set it up, and plot your points versus your point of aim, and it will automatically calculate that zero angle for you.
Yeah.
And that's a perfect example of good in, good out. You take your environmental measurements to the best of your ability, shoot a close to statistically valid sample, and set it up, and that zero angle is going to be perfect.
I mean, I can speak, excuse me, to this just a little bit because I'm a dinosaur. I mean, I fight computers, I fight cell phones, I fight all that kind of stuff. But I can tell you, ForDoff on your cell phone with the features that it have is truly bringing ballistics, shooting ballistic calculations into the 21st century from something that didn't change for 120, 130 years.
Yep. And you can tweak it and refine it and do all the stuff you want to a BC calculator, but it's still a BC calculator.
Yep.
You can put in 20 BCs at different velocities, and it's still using BC. Doesn't matter how. Yeah, you could simulate a drag curve by calculating BCs all the way out, but it's still, the calculator only knows BC.
Yep.
So with that, is there anything about ForDoff and the design and the implementation that you guys want to let the listeners know?
I mean, the one thing I would just part with is that we're constantly looking to add features that make it better for the shooter to use.
Absolutely.
So there's going to be more things continually coming down. They all take time, they take effort, they take money, and most of our folks that are deal with the app are doing other things too. But and most of the stuff that we add is unpaid stuff, but it's just constantly trying to make it a little easier for folks to use and to add some features that we get from going to matches and either seeing something or discovering something we'd like to have work a little better for ourselves or talking to other folks. So we're constantly trying to improve it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just a bandwidth thing.
Yeah. Well, it's a good point though. We are passionate users of our product. We do go to matches to pseudo compete, but we do use the product, and we listen to people who use the product. We listen to our advanced users out there.
I mean, the math's not changing. The math's good. That's 100%.
User interface stuff.
It's just interface things or
features,
or maybe other range card type information or calculating certain things differently for the shooter. So there's just stuff like that we keep working on.
Anything else across the table?
We have a saying internally that ForDoff doesn't lie.
Ballistic lie detector.
Yeah. The only times we've ever seen problems with it is when there's an input that's wrong.
Yeah.
Somebody, in a training event, a guy comes up, he's like, "Hey, this thing's telling me this, and I'm seeing this. Like, this thing is wrong."
Yeah,
So,
you're on.
Let's
MOA
go back.
versus...
Let's go back through your inputs, and every single time something's wrong. You were in meters instead of yards, or vice versa, or your muzzle velocity is not correct, or one of those
zero
inputs is not correct.
Yeah.
It won't lie to you if you feed it good info.
I've experienced that too with training stuff I've done. So it's same thing.
Yeah. Spot on. Awesome, guys. Well, thanks for all your hard work on this project and all the others. And this one specifically, it's helped me. It's helped all of us internally, millions of our customers. I mean, it's helped everybody hit what they're aiming at with more consistency. And like I said to start the podcast, it's always fun to hit what you're aiming at.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys.
Thanks, Seth.
Yep.
Thanks.
Guys, hopefully you enjoyed this podcast about the history and the development of ForDoff. It's free of charge. Give it a try if you're currently using BC. I think you'll like what Ford Off has to offer. If you've got suggestions, comments, don't hesitate to drop a comment or hit us up at podcast@hornady.com, and we'll catch you on the next one.